This is a Nice Guys Patreon exclusive.
32 teams in 32 days rolls along on our Ice Guys NHL team season preview videos. Ian Cameron, Alex P. Smith, and Perlo with you. And in this video, we're going to talk about the Columbus Blue Jackets. And it was a very interesting team to follow throughout the course of last year. Obviously, they started the year playing with heavy hearts after the passing of Johnny Gaudreau last season for the Columbus Blue Jackets. And it's almost like that spirit of Johnny Gaudreau powered this team to play. I don't know, some people will say maybe above their heads a little bit, but I don't think people were expecting Columbus to be that close at the end of the regular season to making the playoffs, and yet they just narrowly missed on making the playoffs. It really came down to them in Montreal, down the stretch of the regular season. But all things considered, with all the heart, just the sorrow and obviously the pain of losing Johnny Gaudreau, and just wondering how that would affect them mentally. Because I know we were on these preview videos last year, Tom, but would it be a bad thing, and would it just shake them up, and they wouldn't have their minds really focused on hockey? But it's almost like it galvanized them to say, you know what, Johnny would want us to go out there and do our best as a team, come together and put a good effort out there on the ice on a nightly basis. And it's almost like they took that attitude and mindset. And for the Columbus Blue Jackets, despite missing the playoffs, it almost felt like a season where a lot of the fan base, for the first time in a long time, is thinking, you know what, we're moving in the right direction. We loved this team. They embraced this team. I know for a fact, I saw statements on Twitter from some Columbus Blue Jackets fans saying, this is the most fun I've ever had watching a Columbus Blue Jackets season this year, what this team was able to provide. And the fact that this team, obviously, the games, they were playing meaningful hockey right until, the mid part of April when the regular season ended. That is something that's been unlike past recent years for the Columbus Blue Jackets. But now, I think as we move into this season, the second year, of course, under Dean Evison, I think expectation rises a little bit. Where, last season was fun. We really got behind this team. We really, loved what we saw and the way the team came together and, bonded obviously over the tragedy of losing their teammate, Johnny Gaudreau. But now there's going to be probably a little bit of expectation in the Columbus area there for maybe this being the year to break the playoff drought and get back into the playoffs. You look at Columbus's season last year, certainly as far as the standings are concerned, 89 points, trailing Washington, Carolina, New Jersey in the Metropolitan Division. And you're not used to seeing Columbus finish ahead of a bunch of teams in the Eastern Conference, but they did. They finished ahead of the Rangers, the Islanders, the Penguins, the Flyers in their own division. And they also finished ahead of Detroit, Buffalo, and Boston in the Atlantic Division last year. So, like I said, steps in the right direction. If Columbus is going to take that next step, be a Stanley Cup playoff team in a very competitive Eastern Conference this season, it's going to have to start with the defense improving. I think we have talked about this, obviously, for years for Columbus. You can't complain about the offense last year. No question. I mean, for Columbus, they were a top 10 offensive team last year. As far as goals per game, the Jackets were 7th in the NHL last season at 3.26 goals per game. So scoring was not a problem. And when you look at the forward group, you can kind of see why that was. When you see how obviously they've gotten tremendous play from I thought it was a great season for Sean Monahan last year. Kirill Marchenko, Voronkov, when Boone Jenner's healthy, he's a guy that can produce offensively, but also give you that leadership component. Kent Johnson, just an immense array of skill and ability from him. You sprinkle in the likes of Igor Shinikov. You get a guy like Matthew Olivier, who's known for physicality and dropping the gloves, playing on the fourth line to chip in with the offense that he did last year. It was a hell of a season, 18 goals, 14. He was a nearly 20-goal scorer on the fourth line for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Don't tell him he's just an enforcer. What Columbus got out of Matthew Olivier offensively last year was something else. And I think the headline of the year, at least as far as what they did on the ice, was obviously the kind of season we saw last year from Zach Werenski on the blue line, who was just took his game to another level. Certainly offensively, he did a career best 82 points, tremendous numbers. I mean, 82 points in 81 games last year. He missed one game in the regular season, Zach Werenski. and he ended up with 82 points in 81 games. It was just an exemplary offensive season, taking his game to new heights after years of, his offensive upside being stunted. Injuries were certainly a part of that, but it was very impressive to see. And it's not just that, but he had almost 300 shots on goal and 131 blocked shots last year for Zach Werenski as well. So his defensive game, also was pretty steady. But obviously, the at the forefront was the numbers that he was able to produce and put up offensively for Columbus from the blue line. You look at up front, I like a lot of what I see up front. Of course, Charlie Coyle now is a veteran player who knows what it's like to be on a winning team. He'll be there with Columbus for a full season this year. Isaac Lundstrom's a bit of an intriguing addition. It's a guy that's played in Anaheim, obviously, previously. Now gets to join this very young, up-and-coming group. I hate to be a bit of a downer with Columbus here, but you have to be honest, and there's still some questions on the blue line. First of all, with Werenski, is he going to be able to duplicate what he did last year? I mean, that was such an outstanding season, and I'm not saying he can't do it again, but when you've done it for the first time at a level no one's seen, there's still that little seed of doubt that, hey, are you going to be able to bring it this year too? Those kind of numbers, that kind of production offensively from the blue line. That's something obviously we're going to wait and see on. You look at the rest of the blue line, Ivan Provorov. It'll be interesting to see what we get, obviously, from him. The Flyers is where he was early in his career. The last 2 years in Columbus, I thought, much like the rest of the team, his game was a little bit better, certainly last year. We'll see if it can continue to improve. And, of course, they gave him a big 7-year, near $60 million contract in the offseason. So Columbus is buying stock in Ivan Provorov, and they're hoping that he rewards them with a very strong season. I love the possibilities of Denton Mateychuk. I think he's going to be a very good blue liner for this team, and he should be a full-time member of that Columbus blue line. There are still depth concerns. I don't know if I love at his age and all the wear and tear on his body at this stage and the physicality he brings, and we know the injuries have mounted. What more can you get out of Erik Goodbranson? At this stage of his career? Damon Severson, kind of the same thing. Christian Jaros, Brendan Smith, Jake Christensen are going to be your depth additions. So, again, this is definitely a team where if the injuries mount on the blue line, they could be in a little trouble, no doubt. And then, of course, goaltending, where they've given Elvis Merzlikins almost too much time to prove that he's a number one goalie in the NHL, and they've stuck with him through some emotional turbulence that he's had to deal with. We all know what happened previously, and he's had to battle those demons, battle those mental struggles, and that certainly played a role in Elvis's inconsistency. But now it's at the time where, mental struggles aside, at some point you got to show what you're made of and play well and be consistent. And he's still struggling to do that for Columbus in net. And then we saw what happened down the stretch when Columbus was hanging around in that playoff race and made it a little scary for Montreal for a bit. Jet Greaves took the net late in the season. He was terrific with the opportunity. And from everything I've read from some of the Columbus reporters, that Dean Evason is very much interested possibly in making this an open competition in training camp and preseason for the number one starting job for Columbus. Jet Greaves is going to get an opportunity to prove he can win it. So I think that's where we're at. We might be looking at potentially Jet Greaves maybe starting opening night as the starting goaltender for the Columbus Blue Jackets, and I'm all for it. I'm all for it, exploring the possibility, because you can only wait for so much. We've already waited for years on Elvis Merzlikins to prove he's a bona fide, legit number one goaltender from a consistency standpoint, and he's had his issues proving it. And Jet Greaves was not just good; he was great down the stretch for Columbus last year, and the opportunity to see if he can take the mantle for the Columbus Blue Jackets in net. Now, this is a guy that's played all his hockey for the most part in the minor pros the last few years, AHL, ECHL. He was Ray Bryce's teammate way back when with Kalamazoo, the Wings, in the East Coast League. So he's battled. He's paid his dues. He had a great run down the stretch for Columbus, and I'm fascinated to see if he can push Elvis Merzlikins here in preseason and training camp. It's one of the things I'm very interested to watch here as far as Columbus is concerned. I think Columbus is building a lot of momentum. At the same point in time, I think a lot broke their way. They had the running on the adrenaline and the emotion of the Gaudreau thing. The guys play career years. Can Werenski do what he did last year? I've got some concerns, at least, or doubts about that. I like a lot of their young group, but there's still some holes on that blue line. And what if injuries strike? And then, of course, the goaltend. If you told me you're going to get Jet Greaves and Jet Greaves playing well most of the season, I'm maybe buying Columbus. Now I'm a little pessimistic. It's still a wait and see approach, and it kind of feels like a what goes up might come back down a little bit this season type of feeling I have regarding the Columbus Blue Jackets. But I'm neutral on them. I have not really gotten involved in any futures on them preseason. I have not really bet their season point total preseason. I'm definitely taking a wait and see approach when it comes to the Columbus Blue Jackets here in 2025, 2026. Alex, your thoughts on the Columbus Blue Jackets?
Yeah, if I were writing a preview, I probably would use the headline, "Timing is everything," right? Because you obviously talk about some of the terrible timing that's happened with some of the players in this organization, but then you talk about some of the quality timing and the fact that we've seen a lot of these young players develop a little sooner than we expected. We saw a lot of growth out of that bunch in Cleveland the last couple of years that made deep playoff runs. And now those players have come to the forefront and are starting to contribute for this Blue Jackets team, starting to gel with the younger core, the Fantillis and the top draft picks that we've seen play over the last couple of years. And Dean Evason's got them rolling. He's the coach that you want to have when you have a young core of guys, when you need someone to rev the motor night in and night out. He's that kind of coach, and so it worked out a lot of ways. It worked out for us as bettors, but it worked out for that team as well. And like I said, I was talking with Perlo before we taped. I said, this team felt like they're about 2 years ahead of schedule the way they played last year. And in saying that, I don't know if they can keep up that pace necessarily this season. Like I said, they were running on so much emotion with Gaudreau's passing and with everything that, there may be a little bit of a settling point to the year. And especially when you look at the schedule, how it breaks down, 14 of their first 24 games on the road. So if they can find a way to get some wins away from Columbus, which at times that's been a little tough, then that's really what's going to dictate how this season goes. But like I said, the most interesting storyline for sure is Jet Greaves and Elvis Merzlikins in net. We've been big proponents of Elvis Merzlikins as a goaltender, but like I said, timing's everything. He's just had a rough go of it the last couple of years, and things just haven't really been able to break his way. With a year left on his deal, getting around $5 million, and now we're seeing Jet Greaves emerge as a guy who, like I said, based on what I saw from last year, not just with his time in the NHL, but even some games that I watched with him at the AHL level, he has grown to the point where I think he could be a legitimate number one option. And he could be a guy to give you 45, 50 starts. If you have that from a guy that's making less than $1 million, then you could maybe make a move and send Elvis somewhere and try and bring in a top flight scorer. Because like we said, with all the young pieces you have, you still don't have that one shutdown superstar scorer. You unfortunately lost him. So now to try to replace that, you will now have potentially some cap space to do that. If Greaves can emerge being the number one guy, you see, hey, we have enough depth. We trust in our goaltending down below. Now, it's a little tricky once you get past the two guys you have in Columbus, because you got Zach Sawchenko, who's an AHL holdover virtually his entire career, and then not much else. So you'd probably need a goaltender coming back. But if you can get $5 million off the books and maybe get an upgraded scoring option, and then you return back a backup that gives Greaves the leeway and the go ahead to be the number one starter on this team, that would be a really interesting dynamic. And maybe that's not the combination that gets them into the playoffs, but if you can help grow the core of this group, and if Greaves is going to be your number one guy of the future, why not start that clock now with some of these other core players that have developed a little bit ahead of time? So it's going to be really interesting to see. I think we're going to still be able to cash some underdog tickets with Columbus. Totals may be a little dicier. Like I said, especially if we're seeing better goaltending. If we see Elvis play up to a higher level, if we see Greaves continue his run and growth, then maybe this is a team where we aren't running to bet over 6.5 like we have been the last several years.
It's a good point about the totals. We've thought of them as an over team for years. Offense ahead of defense with shaky goaltending. That's basically been our thinking behind Columbus for a very long time now. I'm just looking at it last year, what this Columbus team was. And yes, they were a big over team last year. Excluding pushes, they went 46-34 to the over last year. I think it's probably going to be closer. If they get good goaltending, that could be closer to 500, with their over-under mark this season. And Jet Greaves, you're thinking it was such a small sample size. How are you getting so excited? But 7-2-2, 1.91 goals against average, 938 save percentage, and 2 shutouts in those 11 games that he played for Columbus last season. Those are phenomenal numbers. There is that element of, is it just a little bit of a hot streak at the end of a season? Other teams not knowing too much about Jet Greaves' tendencies. How will he fare if he wins a number one job, if he can handle the workload, all that stuff. But the bottom line is the sample size he put out there, as brief as it was, hard to do much better than what Jet Greaves did down the stretch. Perlo, what do you think here for Columbus?
Yeah, definitely a very interesting team. As far as where do I start here? First of all, there's a couple things. I know they had the Goudreau push, and that is something that you've really got to take into consideration. But they also were without Jensen and Monahan quite a bit last year as well. So they did run on the energy, but they run on the energy with less of the veteran presence than they normally would have had for a lot of the season. So that might balance each other out a little bit. As far as Greaves is concerned, I think he's going to be the most important guy to whether they make the playoffs or not here. It's pretty simple as that. I don't trust Merzlikins anymore. So if you believe Greaves is what he showed at the end of the year, I think you got a pretty good chance for this team to make the playoffs. You got a lot of young players, like you got a guy like Fantilli. Okay. This guy, his shot is it's insane. He gets in the slot, man. I'm not saying he's as good as these guys, but he reminds me of the Bossies, Brett Hall. Like he's one of those guys that can score with people on him. He can score in between people's legs. He just picks corners like crazy. He doesn't drive play. He's not good defensively. He doesn't do anything like that. He scores. He's one of those guys that just damn well scores. And they got Johnson on the other side. He's been improving at a pretty good clip. So you imagine he's going to keep on doing that. Marchenko came out last year. I don't see that going back. So you've got a lot of young guys that could keep on moving forward here. And I don't think that we're going to see Evason worrying about X's and O's too much this year again. He didn't worry about it last year. He ran on energy. They played a high offensive system. He tried to keep the spirits up. And you could tell because there was a lot of guys with very high shooting percentages last year. And that is what kind of concerns me. Is a team, when they have high shooting percentage like that, are they going to be able to keep that up? Fantilli had an incredibly high shooting percentage. Johnson had a high shooting percentage. And Marchenko did as well. And that's usually a team that's feeling it. So when they're feeling it, I see this team doing very well. If they, for some reason, start lacking confidence, this team could completely miss. So it's pretty tough. I'm going to bank that Evason keeps this team in the right frame of mind as far as and doesn't clutter their mind with crazy defensive systems or anything like that. And they just play a pure offensive game, and they hope that Greaves is able to bail them out better than they had the goaltending they had last year. And they might be able to, and they might be able to make it in this that way. Montreal did it last year. I think that could change, but that's for another day. But there's teams that do that, and you can do that in the regular season. So I have some futures, though, that I will take. I haven't bet the plus 220 on Columbus simply because I'm probably going to do with it in the year. Find it in the year. I want to see what the Rangers are going to do with their new coach. I want to see if Washington's going to have a letdown early, and then maybe I'll start putting some money on Columbus. But I do kind of like the bones of this team. I like the fact that they got Charlie Coyle. I like that. Sillinger struggled in that third C spot, so he's going to be able to play on the wing with him. I think they're going to be a lot stronger there. I will never for a million years understand the Provorov contract, but it's not like as bad as people think either. And I agree with you. Defensively, you got Branson. It's not so more reason to think that they're going to be playing a high offensive brand of hockey like they were last year. So I'm going to take one. There's one bet I'm definitely taking, and that's Fantilli to score over 30. I think that it's that plus 220. He got 30 last year. I know he has a high shooting percentage, but that's the one guy that I think is going to play his career with a high shooting percentage. He just scores from everywhere, and he gets in the spots. He's got a lot of confidence. And even when he had some down times when he wasn't scoring, I didn't see that kid hang his head. He kept his head up the whole time. So he kept his head up and he was confident the whole time. So that's my biggest bet here is Fantilli. Another one, if you really do like Columbus, and I'll mention a little bit about Greaves too. If you really like Columbus, do what we were talking about with Colorado. Take them to make the playoffs and lose in the first round. I think you can get that at plus 350 because they're not going to beat too many teams playing that system in the playoffs. Simple as that. So even if they
if you think they're going to get in, but maybe to go the stage of elimination route at FanDuel and just say out in the first round.
In the first round. Yeah. So then you can get the added plus on that. I might actually even bet that now that I think about it. But Greaves, I don't personally have I spend so much time just playing capping. I don't have the time to do this fantasy stuff. But I will say that if you're in a deep league and you need a goaltender, take Greaves. Greaves. There's a lot of people going to be sleeping on this guy, especially if you're in more of an amateuristic type fantasy league. They're probably not even going to think about Greaves here. So you can take him for a nice late pick. He's going to get every opportunity, as Ian said, this year to take the number one spot. And even if Columbus is a 500 team, you're going to get a bunch of wins out of him that you wouldn't get in a late spot with a goaltender. And goaltenders are always nice to take in a late spot. So that would be a little bit of a fantasy thing for you to look at.
Normally, when we look at goalies, we talk about, sometimes fading a backup or looking for overs with a backup. Here's a backup that I would be betting on. I think that we could also get some betting value where maybe a line will be off and where they should be favored $1.10 or $1.20. You're getting plus money because Greaves starts. So that will definitely be waiting for goalie confirmations with Columbus, because if everyone's thinking it's Elvis night, and here comes Jack Greaves, and now we see that line move. So I could see myself making some late wagers on Columbus with those changes.
No doubt. Yeah, 31 goals for Adam Fantilli, just backing up what Perlo says, liking Fantilli over the goal total. Yeah, 31 last year for him, and you got to think, he could be consistent 30-plus goal scorer, in the NHL with his shooting percentage and his accuracy with his shot. Monahan, a great year. Now, again, he's now in his 30s. He certainly ran on the adrenaline and emotion of losing his dear friend Johnny Gaudreau and having that 57 points in 54 games last year. But still, it was great to see, and it's just a question of now with the pain subsiding, because time heals everything, and eventually when you lose someone close to you, but eventually, as time moves on, you sort of get past it and continue along. Does he get without that emotion, and that you're playing with this year? Can Monahan bring those numbers again offensively this year for Columbus? Something to definitely keep in mind when it comes to the Jackets and keep a watch for. Great stuff. Before we wrap it up here in their preview with the Columbus Blue Jackets, here is a word from our brand new sponsors, Royal Cannabis.
Royal Cannabis, where the kings and queens shop.
Check them out, Royal Cannabis, royalcannabisshop.com, and 20% off using the promo code ICEGUYS. That's a wrap for the Columbus Blue Jackets. For Alex B. Smith and Perlo, I'm Ian Cameron. This has been your Columbus Blue Jackets NHL team season preview video as 32 teams in 32 days rolls along, courtesy of the Ice Guys.